I never had the intention to homeschool. I was actually very anti homeschooling as a very indoctrinated public school teacher. Our first week was pretty terrible. And after the first day, my goal was to just put them back in public school until a piano tuner came our first day. And I forgot that he was coming. And I was amazed that they were totally engaged with what the piano tuner was saying. And they had no interest in all of the beautiful lesson plans that I had spent weeks preparing and thousands of dollars worth of curriculum that I had purchased that ended up not using. I had to rethink how my kids learned, but I also had to look at structure a little bit differently.
Today's event is about breaking through with open education, spotlighting schedules. Everybody has these questions about, how scheduled should I have my kids? And there's only so much time in the day. And, how many resources do we do? How many curriculums do we try? Today, we're going to get some answers to those questions from Matt and Isaac and Janae, who are all homeschooled parents. They all have very different backgrounds, though. So it'll be really cool to spotlight all of them. First, we're going to start with Isaac, then Matt is going to get into the tactics, and Janae and I are going to do a fireside chat, and then there's going to be a Q&A. So y'all can ask your questions as well. But we hope that this is really, really, really helpful for you. We're going to be sharing a lot of great tools, resources, things that you can use today, tomorrow. So, Isaac, you ready to kick it off?
I love it. Am I the only one that, even though I know the plural of curriculum is curricula, it still feels weird in certain contexts to write it or say it? Some of those Latin phrases. We're gonna learn out loud a little bit here. So like we are learning as we go and have learned as we've gone as parents educating our kids. So we are not coming to you as experts who have figured it all out, but sharing, and Matt in particular kind of going through a workshop style thing to get you going. But don't wait till the Q&A. If you have questions, thoughts, drop them in the chat. I like to have these be lively and interactive. You're here giving us some of your time, and I want to give you what you're looking for and what value we can provide you. So hit up the chat. Fact, just as a little incentive, the first person to ask a question in the chat, we'll send you an OpenEd t-shirt. I think we have some with Ed the horse on them. I don't quote me on that. Those might be out of stock, but we might have some Ed the horse t-shirts for the first question that comes in. So I just want to put this in context. Many of us are so stuck in, rightly so, in the weeds, parenting our kids, educating our kids. But to zoom out, and if you talk to anybody who studies this from a policy lens or just industry trends lens, what is happening in education right now is massive. Like, you are a part of something that's really, really big. You are pioneers, and it's moving from only pioneers into kind of more and more, I won't say mainstream yet, because the vast majority of people are still in more of a standard public schooled situation and mindset, but the minority is going from a really small fringe minority that it was in the 80s when I was a kid homeschooling to something that the words homeschooling or private schooling or virtual schooling or micro schooling, they don't really even capture anymore. Not the number of people looking for alternatives, exiting the sort of traditional boxes, and the variety of approaches is so much, which is why we've just called it open education. Because I'll take my own kids. I don't know how to describe what they do. I mean, one of my daughters is in a 3-day-a-week micro school. Is that a school? Is she a private school student? If that was funded through a public charter school, would she be a charter school student? Uh, is she homeschooled because she's at home 2 days a week? I don't know. I don't really care, actually. I just care about what she's learning and the quality of the experience we're all having. So this is something really, really cool, really magical that's happening. That the idea that you kind of have, hey, you go to public school, or maybe if you have the money, you go to private school, and it looks very much like public school. Maybe it's just supposed to have higher quality. Or if you can handle it, you do everything on your own and you teach your kids at home and you homeschool. Now it's like everything's on the table for every kid, every year, every semester, every week, every day. I mean, we have students who are in the OpenEd program, which is technically a public virtual school program, who will take one class at a brick and mortar public school. They'll go to a co-op for 1 or 2 days a week. They'll do some stuff at home. They'll shadow somebody in the workplace in an apprenticeship and they'll unschool on Fridays. Like all of these things are now here. And that's what's really exciting. So the main message I kind of want to share to open up and set the stage is, if you're trying to create a kind of open education for your kids, if you're trying to open it up and figure out what's best for them and tailor it to them, I want to just share this message that like, your kids are going to be okay. You can relax a little bit. I know that sounds crazy, but hear me out. Like, don't overanalyze and stress how to just perfectly tailor, and don't compare to other people. You hear these stories, you read these newsletters. If you were like my mom growing up, she would subscribe to like, I think it was Practical Homeschool magazine or whatever. And every time she would read it, she'd be like, you know what? You kids should all be learning to play the violin and churn your own butter and sew your own clothes. Cause like somehow we must be failing. Cause look at these other homeschool families, right? Don't compare. You can take joy in what others are doing and achieving and the great things their kids are doing and the stories you hear, and be happy for them without feeling like that should be you. And if you can take a couple tools from the toolkit that they're doing and they work for you, great. But don't feel pressure like, oh my gosh, every time I read a new study about how important it is to learn Latin and what it does for your brain, now I just feel like I'm a failure because I didn't teach my kids Latin. Like, you can't take that on. You got to let that go. If you are bringing your kids up in a loving environment, you love them, you care for them, you are taking the time to try to craft an education for them, you're not going to get everything perfect, but there is a genuinely like, that's actually the core. That's the 80%. That's the 80% of the value comes from that. And then fine tuning exactly what curriculum and exactly what, that stuff's great, but don't let it bog you down and make you feel like a failure. Really, you have to let that go. My wife and I, we have 4 kids. We have messed up every way possible and learned through all kinds of trial and error and experimentation. We've done every variation of structure, schedule, not structure, every approach. And when we've gotten it right, it's not been because we had some perfect plan that we figured out and we did all this research and we just nailed it, but because we kept trying, we kept listening and observing and adapting and not being overly wedded to something, being willing to stick through something and get through that initial phase where it's difficult to see if it's worth it, but not so wedded that we can't let go because now our identity is tied up in being known as the unschool family or being known as the Montessori family or being known as the whatever, recognizing that like it's going to change. We started out homeschooling my son, my oldest, he's 20 now, and he was very verbally astute. He had a great vocabulary and he was very clearly like a more philosophical and good with language. So we're like, oh, great. We're going to do like a really rigorous curriculum, get him started really early. And that was a disaster. And it just didn't work. And then I started reading like Peter Gray and John Taylor Gatto. And I started reading about Sudbury Valley and all the kind of unschool stuff, John Holt. And I was like, oh, okay, just give him a lot more freedom. And we basically went like completely unschool, which was really good when he was really young. Over time, I learned like a little too late, oh, he actually needs more structure. There's things that his personality type, he needs somebody to kind of put some boundaries and strictures or give him challenges. And we're like, okay, we might have overcorrected towards the unschooling side. So then we try to like introduce some more structure, and we went back and forth. And I'll never forget, I was out there writing books and talking and building companies about alternatives to education. And then he was like, hey, I think I want to go to public school. And I had to have this like pride moment where if I analyzed seriously where he was in life, how old he was, I think he was 14 at the time. I wanted him to be able to make that choice for himself. But I had to swallow my pride a little bit and be like, okay, if public school is the right thing for him right now, that's okay. And the worst case, like I can find out if it's terrible for him pretty quickly if we need to intervene, but like I don't have to stick to some purist idea that no, son, we are homeschooler, we are alternative educators, we don't do that. Like this is what he needs. That's okay, right? It's about him. It's about each kid at each stage. He did that for a year and then he ended up not wanting to do that anymore. And he ended up doing something else. So just all this to say, like, it's not catastrophic. If you are engaged and you are trying, and if you're on a call like this, you are like, you care. This means a lot to you. You're not phoning it in when it comes to your kid's education. When you get it wrong or you miss a little bit or something's not a fit, it's not catastrophic. Most of the time, it's just little stuff and you can correct and take that feedback. It's okay. The kids are going to be okay. Love them, care for them, be curious, take what you can from other people, but don't get stuck comparing yourself and don't add needless pressure from the comparison game. Comparison is the thief of joy. And educating your children, yeah, it'll be hard, but it should also be joyful for them and for you. There should be a good bit of joy involved. And if you're always stressing about where they measure up compared to some magazine article or some study or some friend of yours whose kids are always perfect, it's not going to be fun for anybody, and that's not going to be a help. So I just want to encourage you with that you have a lot more room. Kids are a lot more resilient, and they come with a lot more baked in stuff than you might assume. Like, yes, you have a lot of power as a parent to create their environment and some, how you nurture them, but you also don't have as much power as you think sometimes. Like kids, I mean, if you have multiple kids, they're radically different, even raised in the same environment, and they're going to do things and they're going to learn things, and recognize that you've got grace and you can relax and breathe a little bit. So with that, I'm going to check really quick the questions in here. Matt Barnes, take on AI in education. That's great. I'll just give you a really quick short answer, and then I'm gonna kick it off. I don't want to get into details, but we'll kind of hold that for later if we want to dive into it more. Should I continue scheduling everything the same time-wise? I'm going to leave that for Matt when he gets going. The AI and education thing. Honestly, this is going to sound silly and like an overly simplistic answer, but I think it's a tool like any other tool. It's like, what do you think about books and education? What do you think about computers and education? What do you think about calculators in education? You could say, yeah, this is different. It's not the same. But at a fundamental level, it is. It's a tool that allows us to do really cool things. And we have to kind of figure out where and when it's useful in our kids' education. And nothing's a panacea, but there's some really interesting things there. What can you use that for? And how can you, if you have a world in which, calculators have just been invented, then having kids memorize multiplication tables is going to be less valuable than it used to be. In a world where AI is invented, there are certain things that are going to be less valuable and certain things that would be more valuable. So like stay curious and unthreatened by tools like that. Don't look for them as like the one-stop fix, but also don't look as them as some kind of like doom and gloom. You have to change your whole approach. So we've got a couple great specific questions about scheduling, planning, putting together a curriculum. And Matt has some great tools to help you think through and plan for each kid. What is a good fit? Should your 11 and 8-year-old be doing things the same time-wise? How many days a week would you recommend for a neurodivergent student? I'm going to let Matt walk you through kind of a workshop to give you some tools to think about these things for your kids, not to give you the specific answers for your specific kids, but to give you some frameworks and exercises you can walk through to help answer some of these questions. So Matt, I'm going to hand it over to you, man.
All right. Thanks, Isaac. That was great. So I hope everybody can really appreciate Isaac's vision and experience. And, I'm going to hold up the book that we wrote together. The fact that we are partnered together and he embraces that public ed is part of the options that families have is really what is a cool differentiator of OpenEd, that we believe tap into all the resources available. Don't limit yourself because of some label. Just tap into everything that you can to help your child. So that's really the message that we have here. So it sounds like, Isaac, you owe Matt Barnes from Houston a t-shirt for his first question there. So that'll be awesome. Well, good. Well, I've got just a few slides here that I'm going to use as kind of the foundation of the workshop today. And it comes from our book, and we dive, lots of details behind all of these things. But I'm just going to do a high-level review of the 5 building blocks that really it's a mindset more than it is anything. And so that's the first message, is embracing the open education mindset. Number 1, embrace your child's uniqueness. As we all know, every child is different, and we need to think differently about each child, and designing the plan for one child might look different than another. And that can be overwhelming. And so it's just the first concept is embrace their uniqueness. And a quick personal story. On Tuesday, I took my grandson and 2 grandsons to the library. And the next day, I took my granddaughter to the library. We had kind of Grammy and Pop's Day for the Tuesday and Wednesday. And they were totally different experiences, going with 2 grandsons, ages 2 and 1, and a 5-year-old granddaughter, right? And so just seeing even our children and grandchildren now, how different they are from each other, is building block number 1. Embrace that every child's different. Building block number 2. This is probably one of the hardest of all steps we encourage every family to think about. Put your kids before your reputation. It's so easy to get caught up in societal pressures and family reunions and Sunday dinner with aunts and uncles and grandma and grandpa. And this is kind of what Isaac was saying is put your kids ahead of that reputation. Take a little bit of humility, step back and say, you know what? I'm confident that I'm giving them my love, my genuine best efforts, and I'm tapping into all these resources and know that that's going to be the best thing for them in the long term. So, but that's a really hard one. We understand it. There's societal pressure. We all have insecurities. We have doubts if we're good enough parents or not. We all feel that. So we're all just trying, and it's a messy experience. And I think just doing your best is great. Building block number 3, map the learning landscape. That's where we're going to dive into a little bit, a couple exercises that are in the book that we hope will unlock some of this thinking for you as you begin this journey. Number 4, give your child a voice. You know, again, every child's different, but feel comfortable giving them something even at the young age. So there's some research out there that I read recently that says, you know, an 8-year-old can make really powerful decisions about their life. And so whatever that works for your family, but give your child a voice. There is something about including them in the conversation of what their education plan might look like, not just have it be a parent driven decision. And that leads into the 5th building block is create these learner driven sprints. We call them just simple 2-week activities. It's not a big, don't overwhelm yourself. It's literally like, hey, what do you want to learn for 2 weeks? Give them some resources. And after 2 weeks, report back on what you learned. If that's all you do to just kind of dabble in this space for a little bit, you'll be off to a great start. And on that note, I wanted to pull up the chat again. And I'd love to have everybody, how many years ago did you start embracing an open education mindset? So just put in the chat a number. How, you know, it could have been when your first child was first born. So that's great. But just when do you think you started embracing this kind of open education mindset that led you to come to something like this tonight? So let's just see the range. Super interesting. So we have beginners to 15, 5, 11, 41 years ago, Isaac was born, couple years, 3 years, 17. Yeah. Look at this span, right? So again, notice how many are recent. So just know, the message with that is you're not alone. There are families and parents all over the world who are trying to understand more and adapt and create open education for their children. So kudos to all of you for being here tonight. You are doing the right thing for your kids and just keep it up. That's what we hope to be able to message. And looking at that span of how long people have or how short they've done, as Isaac said, don't compare yourself with someone else. Just do your best, and that'll be great. So let's dive into one of the many exercises in the book. We call it the sticky note exercise. And this is something that I hear a lot from parents is, we start with this principle, and this is mapping the learning landscape. Begin with, what are your kids' interests? And everyone starts usually with, I don't know what they really like. They feel stressed out all the time. And so we really, to start discovering their interests, you do need to do a little bit of detox time where they don't have to do anything for a little while. And then you start introducing these questions. We call it sticky note because you just have a stack of sticky notes somewhere in the house. And over the period of a few days or a week, you have your kids have these questions available and they just write down what comes to their mind. No judgment zone. No, you're not taking any action. You're just brainstorming as a family. What are things, and parents, you need to do this too. So this isn't just, kids need to do this. It's fascinating to do this alongside your children. Model for them. As an adult, what do you like to learn about? What do you do or think about when you're free time, when you have nothing to think about? What do you believe you're good at doing? What are you not good at yet, but you'd like to be, that you'd like to improve upon? And equally important, and this is often left ignored because we often think kids should like everything all the time, is what activities do you genuinely dislike and you have no interest in developing? So allow yourself to have that conversation too. I really don't like that, and I really don't want to improve on that. So these are some of the 5 questions just to start that discovery interest exercise. And so I did one just for fun. I'd love to see, pull up the chat and everyone think about, let's just do 2 big categories. What are you interested in? And what are you not interested in? Let's see what comes up here. So open share of what are things that you as an adult are interested in or not interested in. Let's have some fun with it. See what you like. Maybe it's a little scary to do that. We often do this in person with a workshop, so it's less intimidating maybe than putting it out there. Nice. Got a little entrepreneurship there. Yeah. Thank you for being open. And, this one, not interested in cooking. There are so many people that love cooking. So that's okay. We can have different likes and dislikes as humans. Same thing with children, right? So we don't have to force all this expectation that they should like everything that most people like or something. That it just doesn't exist. So I want to go on the math popped up here several times. I wanted to share a personal experience from working with families over the past 20 years is when someone says they don't like math, especially a child in the OpenEd program, we usually say, oh, you know what? That's the adult fault right there. We haven't found the curriculum or approach to math that works with your brain. It's not you, it's us. We haven't taken the time to figure out how does your brain learn math stuff. So I think that's really interesting that math was one of the things that popped up regularly. And it's something that we really believe in OpenEd, that there's dozens, if not hundreds of ways to teach math. And let's keep working until we can find one that clicks with our child's learning style and brain. And it can be super impactful that way. All right, let's go on. So that's the discover interest phase. So kind of just as a family, brainstorm, everybody shares what do they like, what do they don't like, what are they good at, what are they not good at, and what do they do when they don't have anything to do. So that's really the key question is, what do you think about when you don't have to think about anything? And try to have time and freedom for those ideas to bubble up. All right, so let's go to the second and third steps here, kind of combined for the purposes of tonight's workshop. What's magical is when you begin with interests, then you start having a conversation about needs. So I'm going to start with needs and we'll just end quickly with resources. But it's really been interesting over these years where we say, what are some of the interests that you have, child? And you start saying, well, what are the needs of our family? Starting with the needs of the child, needs of the family, and then branch out a little bit into the neighborhood and community. Depending on their age, maybe don't even go to nation and world yet. Wait till they're older for that. Sometimes we overwhelm kids with world problems when they're too young for that. So start with what are the needs of the child? What are the needs of the family? You have sibling needs, you have family chores, you have responsibilities, you have budgets, you have time commitments, you have all these things. You have to marry those with what are the needs and interests. And what's magical is when you can find interests that align with needs in your neighborhood or community. That's where entrepreneurship begins. That's where community service begins. And that's where some real learning happens is the marriage between children's interests, and even better if you can align a child's interests with a parent interest or a mentor or a aunt or uncle or a friend or a neighbor that has that interest. And you start to say, well, what are the needs in the community that we might be able to solve in this interest area? And so much learning can happen when you just start having those conversations, whether it's, again, making money for an entrepreneurship pursuit or raising money for a nonprofit or whatever. It can be all kinds of opportunities to serve in the community. And that's where you marry that interest with needs. And again, as they get older, look at your nation or world. Are there worldwide problems that we want to try to tackle starting in our own home? And those are needs and things that really create so many conversations around authentic learning that just become a powerful marriage between interests and needs. The last thing I'll just mention briefly is the resources. What we advocate for in an open education mindset is then identify all the resources you have available. Again, in your family, community, nation, and world. Figure out what are the resources that you can wrap around that child and provide opportunities for them to learn and grow. And what we like to start with is start with free. Begin, listing all of your resources and rank them from free down to expensive. And be okay that we know that there's a scale of that from free to expensive. And then just start going down the list and stopping when your family needs and budgets hit a point where that's where you can go, and know that that's okay. You're identifying the resources available and you're mapping those to your needs and interests of your family. It can create a really powerful trifecta effect between interests, needs, and available resources. So with that, again, we go way deep into that in the book, and hopefully those types of workshop activities will help you and your family just get started and have a framework to begin some of those exercises, from identifying needs, discovering interests, identifying needs, and looking at all the different resources available. All right, so with that, I'm going to end with this question that Ella and the webinar kind of teed up from the beginning, and some of the questions were related to this. How structured should my child's education, child's schedule be? So before we even go to that, I'm going to throw out the big, it depends. So start with that, is don't think there's a right answer to this. How structured should my child's schedule be? So I'll remove the, it depends. So with that caveat, start to just on the spectrum of 0 to 10. How structured should your child's education, schedule be? There's so many variables to that. So the answer really is it depends. Going back to that interests and needs and resources, you might say, you know what, we want to be a little more structured as we go solve a community problem and create an entrepreneurship opportunity. That might require a little bit more structure. Maybe my child is struggling in one area and they really want to learn about something that they can't access that curriculum yet because of reading or writing skills or whatever. So you're going to structure a little bit more around that. But know that this can change by day, by week, by month, by year. There's no right answer when it says how structured should it be. And in fact, in the book, we cite some research that actually says the more you structure learning, the less learning lasts. And that's kind of powerful if you think about this concept that we sometimes overstructure, overschedule our kids' learning, thinking that we're doing it better that way. When in fact, perhaps, and again, it depends, perhaps the opposite will help them learn more. If you destructure, deschedule all of that time that your child has. The other thing we really advocate a lot in the book is about playtime, unstructured playtime. There's something magical that happens when children are given just unstructured playtime. And even cite some research in there that talks about boys in particular. They need to be physically exhausted before they're even ready to learn something academic. So you might have an hour and a half recess time for your boy to just run around the neighborhood, get exhausted, then come in for 10 minutes. And that 10 minutes of learning will stick way longer because they've been exhausted for an hour and a half. So again, how structured should it be? Depends on child's interests, their age, their needs. All kinds of stuff is factored into that. So we really just encourage you to, again, start with a child, say, how can we build resources around what they're interested in and align those with our family needs. So with that, I'll wrap up. If you have a phone or if it's handy, or you can just go to opened.co/book, and there's a free open education toolkit there. It's like 13 pages. Ella did a fantastic job, and Charlie, of pulling out some of these key activities into a free downloadable toolkit that will help you and your family get started in embracing this open education mindset. So with that, I'll hand it over to you, Ella.
Amazing. So me and Janae are about to kick it off. Isaac, I did want to call out what you just posted in the chat though. Can you speak to this for 2 seconds really quickly? So you said that something worked really well for your family was having little structure in the early years, more structure middle years, and then more self-imposed structure toward the later years. Explain that a little bit.
Yeah, self-imposed or sort of external, but not from parents. Yeah, I've just we've learned as stumbling through like it's almost like when we figure out what works and we're like, finally we got it. And then like a year or two goes by and we suddenly realize, oh wait, they've moved out of that phase. They need something else. So in the really early years, like 0 to 10, something that looks close to unschooling or some very loose version of you're putting them in environments and resources and play groups and you're giving them books and things to play, but you're kind of just following their interests and really letting them lead it and giving a good deal of freedom and not too much structure. Getting into that like 10 to 13, 14 phase, we've found with our kids, that's when we will notice aptitudes and interests they have, but they are in that very delicate, they're starting to be aware and have like insecurities and social pressures. So where they'll like be too cool to try hard at something. And we kind of need to like make them take piano lessons. And we actually know they enjoy it and they enjoy what they get out of it. But if we left it to them, they would probably quit too early. We've just noticed with some of our kids, they get to an age where suddenly they would give up on things that they're actually going to get a lot of benefit and joy from. So we get a little bit more structured, a little bit more demanding with household chores, more demanding with get on a better schedule. Don't stay up so late at night so that you feel cranky in the morning or whatever. Just being a little bit more involved in trying to guide them. And then they get to a point in their teens where we pull off again and they start to, because of their own, they want to join a sports team that's more competitive. That demands certain things from them with practice and exercise. They want to get a job and make money. That demands structure. So now they have structure, but it's coming from things they want. It's not coming from us saying, we're going to make you do this. But I did find that like middle phase where there is sort of this like, okay, time to be a little bit more imposing. And then they kind of like are ready to take that on. And that's tended to be a pattern that's worked for our kids.
Super interesting.
Hey, Ellen, let me just add quickly, because I was a
Definitely.
sixth grade teacher. And so I spent years studying research about that 10 to 14-year-old forgotten child, because we do so many things for elementary kids and high school kids, but that 10 to 14-year-old is often forgotten. And it's one of the big things that stood out to me is that children change more between 10 to 14 than any other time in their lives except 0 to 3. So if you think about how much we help children 0 to 3, they really need almost that much help again in the 10 to 14, because they're changing so much more than in their entire lives, except as infants. So I think that's a powerful reminder of how much change that age group is going through.
That's super interesting. We're going to move on to Janae. But before we do, I'm just going to let everybody know we are going to get to questions at the very end. So if anything has not been answered, if you want to throw your question in the chat, we'll go through the order that they've been asked. So if there's anything specific that you want to know, definitely throw your question in there. So many of you have not met Janae yet, so I'm super excited to introduce you. Janae Daniels is the founder of School to Homeschool. It's a leading podcast and educational platform that empowers families to transition from traditional school to home education, which is what she did. She was actually a public school teacher, so we'll get into that. Talks a lot about structure. And then over time, she actually started homeschooling. So, Janae, can you share a little bit about your story? I know that you started homeschooling your kids a lot later. So that was something that's quite unique about your story. Instead of starting your homeschooling journey really young, you started whenever they were already about in high school. So, kick it off. In that case, Isaac and Matt, can you answer one of our questions while I'm getting her back on? I think the very first question was about whether or not to schedule an 11-year-old and an 8-year-old at the same time. Like, should you try and make your kids' schedules fit each other?
I'm going to give you a really short answer to that, and then I'll let Matt go. Just from talking to my wife, who, I'm working most of the time during the day and she's doing most of this. There are a lot of these decisions that come down to what can she handle. Sometimes, even if it would be slightly better if the kids had like totally different tracks, there are phases of life where she's like, I'm sorry, they're both just going to have to do these things at the same time because I can't handle it. So make sure that you're not doing something that's unsustainable for you as like a first cut, because that actually does matter too. Like you gotta be in a place that's sustainable. But Matt, thoughts on that? 8 and 11. Like, there's a lot of cool stuff about mixed ages, a lot of benefits, but I also understand kids sometimes need different things. I'm curious how you approach that with your kids.
Yeah, I think the short answer is that that's part of that needs analysis, right? You can't just have everything be driven by interest and with no thought to needs. So if there's a need of a parent, if there needs a child, like marry that a little bit. And so if how that works out may look different for each child, but I love multi-age groups. I think there's a lot of value there instead of just the birth year cohort model. So I think it's really just, it depends, and maybe do some activities that are separate, some activities together, and join up with other groups. I think is a good mix of it all. Janae, welcome back.
Thank you. It's good to be back. I'm Janae Daniels. I host the School to Homeschool podcast. Can you hear me okay?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, good. So yeah, I'm actually a COVID convert to homeschooling, and I was a public school teacher in my former life before I had children. And I taught middle school. So I never had the intention to homeschool. I was actually very anti-homeschooling um, as a very indoctrinated public school teacher, but COVID changed that for us just because we're like, well, we may as well. I mean, we don't know if they're going to be in or out of the classroom. And when we started, I definitely had that ultra structured mindset in my head that we had to hit all of the subjects and then add a few like composer study, which I had never, thought about in my entire life. But I was like, no, I read somewhere that we need to study composers and artists, so we're going to add that in and memorize poetry. Um, but our first week was pretty terrible. And after the first day, my goal was to just put them back in public school until a piano tuner came our first day. And I forgot that he was coming. And he rang the doorbell, and slowly my kids, went upstairs and wanted to be with the piano tuner and watch him. And when I went upstairs that morning, again, like we didn't even make it through 2 hours without me crying and them crying, and I was going to put them back in public school. Um, but we went upstairs, and I was amazed that they were totally engaged with what the piano tuner was saying. And as he talked to them about sound waves and the mallet hitting the strings and octaves and geometry. And they had no interest in all of the beautiful lesson plans that I had spent weeks preparing and thousands of dollars worth of curriculum that I had purchased that ended up not using. Um, I had to rethink how my kids learned, but I also had to look at structure a little bit differently. Um, as you mentioned, Ella, my oldest two kids actually graduated from high school, from public high schools. And then my next two were approaching high school when we pulled them. And then the last two, one was going into preschool, or one was in preschool, and then one was in elementary school. And so for us, I took a step back. I had never heard of deschooling, had to learn what that was. And I loved what you said, Matt, that there has to be an amount of time that you're not doing anything. And so we ended up, after that first week of a disaster of our first week of homeschooling, I started looking at what is deschooling, and what does that mean? And we eventually moved to more of an eclectic unschooling model over time, as I realized that my kids actually were interested in things, and as they discovered that they were interested in things. Um, and so now it's interesting because many of you that are on this call have been homeschooling a lot longer, and have so much wisdom. And I feel like each year I'm learning something new, or what worked last year doesn't work this year. But I always come back to the same things, in that, like, I always tend to go, oh, I need to put more in my schedule. And then I realize I think I'm overscheduling again. I think I need to pull back. And my husband brought this up today. He's like, so you've decided to be an Uber driver again? As I was like, oh, I guess I scheduled too much. And so I think there's a balance, but it's true. I loved what you said, Isaac, about that. Yeah, in those early years, there's got to be a lot of unschooling and playing and some structure. I have my 9-year-old has sensory processing disorder. And if she had zero structure, her little brain goes haywire. So I have to have some amount of structure in the morning. Like these are the expectations of things that you need to get done. And then you can play and play and play and play. But I found that with my middle school son, he kept trying to push like the boundaries with technology over the last few weeks. And he's like, can I start playing video games like instead of at 3 o'clock? Can we start it at 12 if I get everything done right now? And I realized that he needs more structure. And he finally admitted, he goes, I feel like I want more to do, but not too much, but I want more. But I don't want to go back to public school. But I want a little bit more. And so, finally my husband and I talked about it and we found a an apprenticeship program for him and then 2 enrichment programs that he could go to. And so he's like, okay, so I've got 2 days off, but then I've got 2 structured days, which really works. So yeah, that's a little bit about us. And then my older kids, they have their own schedules. And I loved what you said. Like the older that they get, there's those outside external forces that go, yeah, well, you have a job now, so here's the schedule that you're gonna have, and you have to learn to balance everything. And so, my 18-year-old son is actually headed out to spend 2 years in service, and then my 17-year-old daughter is taking some college classes. And even yesterday, she's like, I was not anticipating some of my homework taking as much time with these 2 classes. I thought they'd be a little bit easier, and so I've got to really focus on working on my schedule and my time blocking better. And I was like, there you go. But I don't tell her what to do anymore. I don't schedule things for her anymore. But I think you're right on. It's my middle school child, my 13-year-old, that realized he needs more structure. Otherwise, he just wants to be lazy and do nothing. So that's what I have to say right
That's
there.
great. And I love what you said about your different children and how they kind of give you clues as to how much structure they need. Can you speak a little bit more to that? Like, as a mom, how do you make decisions on adding more structure? You said that you've done a lot of like trying to figure it out. You've done a lot of trying to add in structure and then realizing it's too much. When do you decide to put more structure? When do you decide to like take some out?
So, well, first of all, I have to say, I look at my husband and my husband is super structured. Like our personalities are as opposite as you can get. We both wake up very early in the morning and we work out and all of that good stuff in the mornings, although he was my inspiration to do that. But he is very like by the book with everything, puts everything in his calendar, uh, knows his macros, and everything has to be very scheduled for him. And I am the free spirit that's like, if I have to have 2 appointments in my calendar a day, that's way too many. I just want absolute freedom. And I assumed that my kids were all going to be like me, only to realize a lot of times it's that they'll say I need more structure. My 17-year-old daughter, I remember it was about 3 years ago. She said, "Mom, I learned something about myself, and that is I don't like too much structure, but I like classes, and I like being given assignments. I do like my free time, but I need you to give me a more rigid schedule or put me in some classes so I can have a more rigid schedule because I don't want to waste my time." Um, versus my youngest who has expressed, and she's 9, and she's very emotionally intelligent. Of all my kids, she kind of gives me a run for my money with that because she'll call me out on stuff all the time. But she recognized early on, she's like, if you give me too many things, I feel overwhelmed. And so could I just have a couple hours a day of things that I am expected to do, and I'll get them done in the morning and then have some freedom, which for a young child is very, very, as you parents know, that it's very unusual. For my 13-year-old, he didn't come to me and tell me that until much later that he wanted structure, but I noticed that he was just wasting a lot of time and just wanted to be on technology all the time, to the point that I finally asked him, I'm like, do you have a little bit of an addiction? And he's like, yes, I do. And so we worked through that together. And then eventually he said, I realized I think I need more to do. But again, I don't want too much. I want a nice balance. Um, last last spring, I ended up putting him in something almost every day. And I'm like, you've got survival skills on this day, and you've got this, and you've got this. And he said, I am feeling very overwhelmed. I feel like I need some time for my brain to rest, and I don't have any time to rest. And so I had to really go back and evaluate, have I put him in too many things? But I also look at myself and go, am I an Uber driver again? Which is something that I've tried to avoid being since becoming a homeschool mom. Because I used to be that mom where I was like, they are going to be in T-ball, and they are going to be in basketball, and they are going to be in soccer, and they are going to be in piano lessons, and we're going to do this all as soon as they finish their school day at public school. And they were exhausted. And I find that I have that tendency to sometimes want to, I'm so used to that I want to go back to that, but I have to pull away and go, no, I didn't like it. They didn't like it. I was tired. They were tired. Am I getting tired again? Which is the conversation we had this morning. Am I driving too much? Um, and if that's the case, then I'm going to have to take some things off the plate, not only for my kids, but for myself.
Yeah, I love your emphasis on asking questions and just kind of noticing. So, like, if your kid is always on their screens or if they're always doing something, then just like testing and asking them, do you think you could handle more? Or like if your kid is quite scheduled, asking the question like, how are you doing? Like, is this tiring for you? And just like really temp checking because sometimes it just takes the question for your kid to tell you the truth. And I think that's really, really wise. One question that I have, and this will be the last question before we go into a full Q&A with all of us, is how you determine when it's right to schedule them more versus allow them to be bored. Because you and I have talked in the past about how important boredom is for kids, right? It allows them to find their interests. It allows them to explore things that they never thought that they could explore. You told me that your kids have had taken up gardening and like music and instruments and things that you never expected them to because they were bored. But like sometimes I could see a parent looking at the question of, okay, my kid is so bored that they're doing things that I think are destructive, right? Like, where is that line for you?
So I guess I have to say first, had I've had to put boundaries on technology with the kids, particularly my 13-year-old. Um, and so that's the first thing, was imposing that I had to, I had to be responsible with those boundaries. I couldn't leave it to them to be like, at 3 o'clock, you need to get off. It was at 3 o'clock, I'm checking and saying, Art, you need to get off. Like, I have to be the adult and expect, and do that for them and impose those boundaries and not expect them just to follow along, because they're very addictive. And if they're addictive for an adult, they're even more so for a child. So as an adult, first thing is I had to impose boundaries on the technology piece. And then I wanted them to get bored. Um, and what I noticed, so as I mentioned last spring, I overbooked them, but it was because in the fall, my son had, and I'm speaking specifically for my 13-year-old, but I want to be very clear about that because he's been my child lately that I'm like, oh, okay. I want to make sure he has just enough, but not too much. In the fall, he only had one enrichment program, and then we did the bare minimums, reading, writing, math, and a little bit of history. And I found that, and I imposed the boundaries on technology, and it was great because he started getting really, really, really bored, and then he started doing things like making sourdough and getting into gardening, as you mentioned, and getting into all of these wonderful things. But then he came to me and said, I'd like more. And so I think that's the key, is observing and asking questions. And that's something I appreciate that Matt and Isaac have talked about so much, is getting their input, because it's their lives. They're not, kids aren't stupid, you know? And so he did say, I would like more. And so then I, as the parent, went way overboard last spring and was like, let's get you into everything then. And then he pulled back and said, this is mom, that, he got a little gun ho, and that was a little too much. So for me, it's a matter of like setting the boundaries, allowing them to have boredom, and then they express, and I watch too, like, oh, they want more and they need more. And it was my bad that I put way too much on their plate then. Anyway.
That's a great answer. Okay, I'm going to kick us off into our Q&A with a question from Stacy. How many hours a day or week would you recommend for a neurodivergent student? If anybody has any more questions, drop them in the chat.
It's one of those that's very hard for me to answer in a general way, without knowing the child, but trying a few different things, like even try two extreme ends of the spectrum, a couple days where there's a lot and see what happens, how far it goes, and a couple days where there's very little, and kind of calibrate and adjust, like understand that it's not I have to have the answer right now and get it right, but let me kind of test a couple of hypotheses. Let me kind of create some experiments and then sort of pivot as we go and get that feedback.
That's
Yeah,
a
I think
great
that's
answer.
yeah, just observe, ask questions, open up conversations. You really can't over diagnose or prescribe.
That's
Yeah,
a
I think
great
that's
answer.
yeah, just observe, ask questions, open up conversations. You really can't over diagnose or prescribe. It's really about the journey. It's about, is there the environment for them to open up to you and remove maybe some of the structure or pressure that might be, initiating some of those behaviors. So yeah, I think all the above.
But
That's awesome.
I found too, I have a 2E child, and I like what you said about getting them to the point of exhaustion, that they have to be outside to the point of exhaustion. And when we first pulled them from public school, it was actually hard at the beginning to get them outside because they were used to sitting inside so much. But I found for my 2E child, they don't need as much um they don't need as much time with academics as much as they need that physical, like that physical energy to get out, because I also have ADHD. And so I think that's really important, and you have to kind of you play with it a little bit to see what their limits are any given day, and it changes from day to day, as you know, with neurodivergent kids. Although what I have found is that same child needed structure. Like they needed a lot of structure, but I had to allow for them to get their energy out before they were ready to learn.
On the asking your kids, it's funny. I have learned if my kids are if they sense that I am judging them in some way or that I am disapproving of what they're doing, and I'm like, hey, is that really what you should be doing? If they feel that, they'll put up their defenses and defend themselves instinctively. If there's no threat that I'm coming and trying to take something away or mess something, and I'm just in a good spot where I'm saying, hey, do you feel like that's do you feel like that was a productive use of your time yesterday, spending that much time on a screen or whatever else? If they're in a place where it's I can be non-threatening, then they're actually really good at being honest about it. It's surprising. They will say, yeah, probably not. Or my girls recently had they're 14 and 15, and they had their devices taken away for like a week. For It's a long story, but anyway, what I noticed was they ended up doing so much stuff that they hadn't done in a while. They were playing board games with each other. They were doing, baking. They were playing with my 8-year-old son. And after that week, I said, now be honest. Didn't you guys actually have kind of fun and like rediscover some stuff that you haven't done as much now that you've been texting with your friends all the time and FaceTiming and stuff? And they were both like, yeah, actually, we had more fun together than we have in a while. And I was like, okay, so what are you going to do about it? What are you going to learn from that? Right. And like we put limits on their screen time somewhat, but they're older. So we're trying to get them to have that ability to recognize those things, and just asking those questions can be really amazing.
I love it. Next question comes from Jessica. She's new to homeschooling, trying to homeschool a 12-year-old while working a full-time job, single parent household. Any recommendations? Any reputable people that you'd recommend as well?
Okay, so my favorite the unschooling, what's the term? Social media influencer who actually happens to be my friend as well, is Nicole Schiffler. She is a hardcore unschooler, but she structures it. Whereas most people think of unschooling as very completely unstructured and just like let them do whatever they want and you don't do anything for them. She actually showed me that, oh yeah, no, you can provide structure to your kids and still unschool at the same time. So that's who and she and I have become good friends over the years. But that's who I like for unschooling. And then I'm also an unschooler. Well, I'm an eclectic unschooler. Sometimes we don't unschool. Sometimes I have them do things like reading, writing, and math. So
We've had a couple interesting people on this podcast. Carrie McDonald, for one, she does a lot of writing on unschooling and lots of different forms. And then Claire
Honeycutt.
Ella Honeycutt, Claire Honeycutt. She actually just wrote a really nice exploration of unschooling that was like, hey, here are the things that maybe are harder about it and some of the challenges, and here's like the reality is it's more, maybe it is more of a structured unschooling. It was excellent, so I recommend that as well.
Do you all have any tips or recommendations for starting this homeschool journey as somebody that is trying to work a full-time job, single parent household? You know, you're doing this on your own a bit, but
Yeah, I mean, first of all, like, shout out to you. That's awesome. That's amazing, and your child will remember that you are taking the time to try to craft an education for them. Recommendations for guidance. So, I mean, at that age, the nice thing is if you are working full time and you don't have a lot of time to be there, they are kids of that age are able to, like, with a combination. I often find like some online courses that have some guidance. Outschool has some great stuff. If they can do some self-guided stuff, Khan Academy has some great stuff. And then just, books and things like, again, go through Matt's exercise. Okay, what are you interested in? What do we have around? Hey, let's do like a unit study. You're interested in this? Read. I actually love this. When kids get to that age, maybe 13, 14 especially, but saying, hey, what's something that you're interested in that you think is cool? If you read 3 books on that subject, you will literally be in like the top 10% of people in the world in knowledge. And pick a subject. Doesn't matter. Insects. If you read 3 books on insects, that's more than like 90% of the population knows about insects. So like when you sometimes letting kids know, you can actually be like a bit of an expert pretty easily with a lot of things. And sometimes letting them do kind of a self-guided unit study, like, hey, I'll provide this. And then asking them, you tell me, what would you like your schedule to be? And you don't have to do it for the whole year, but like, hey, let's take the next 2 weeks. What do you think you want to learn? And then what is the outcome going to be? So then I can come and check. Did you produce that outcome? How did it go? Why did you not like it? What are we going to do next time? Kind of being the questioner, and then they get to kind of do the structure and guidance. That way you can sort of come home from work, see what they've done, do those questions. That's, I think, something that has worked fairly well if you don't have the ability to be very hands-on. My wife does not want to like do the teaching of our kids. She drives them around and she does a lot of stuff, but she wants them to be either doing it themselves or finding someone else, whether in a co-op or an online course, who can do most of the actual instruction to the extent that's involved, or let the kids lead themselves.
yeah, I love that.
can I bring up something too? When we started homeschooling, and my daughter at the time was 12, just like your child. I found, like, at the beginning when we were going through the deschooling process, I only focused on reading, writing, and math. But what I found, if I got 3 curriculums that I had to facilitate all 3 for all of the kids, I got burned out really, really fast. And so, but then I also found that if I got curriculums where it was like online and it was completely self-directed, then I disconnected from them. And so what I've learned is there's a happy medium in the middle where if you can find like a curriculum that works for your family for one subject that's very hands-on, and then the other 2 are more self-directed, um, then that way, if you do have more than one child, that way you can be involved to some degree with the children with one curriculum while the others are doing the self-directed stuff, and then you can flip-flop. But to avoid burnout, make sure that you're not doing all of the teaching for all of the major subjects. Like, outsource where you can, but then still be involved with some of the curriculums. There's a happy medium. Um, but don't get curriculums that would make you be hands-on with everything, especially as a single working mom. But again, you still want to keep that connection. So maybe you have one, like maybe it's language arts, if you so choose to go with a curriculum for language arts. Again, we stuck to reading, writing, and math, and that was the extent our first year of what we would do as far as actual any sort of curriculum. Um, but I found like, okay, math, doing an outsourced math program was great. And then I would do language arts and then we would read together and call it good. And that way I didn't get too burned out. And it was short, like we could do it all in an hour and it was great. And then they'd have all sorts of free time to explore their interests, that especially that first year. Then I didn't get burned out and they didn't get burned out, and it allowed them time to explore at the same time. And I still kept a relationship and drew closer to them.
I know we're a few minutes past. I was hoping, Matt, you would take, there's a question that came in through the actual like Q&A function rather than in the chat. And I wanted to hear your take on this one because I think I've heard you talk about this. Crystal says, tips on getting teens, 13, 14 especially, to get on a better schedule, especially lights out at bedtime. Getting everything done early enough to still get lights out and get plenty of sleep. I'm curious your thoughts on that, letting your kid, getting them to sleep right and manage their time, especially when they're young teens.
Well, it starts with, it depends. I know everything does, right? Because even in the book, we cite some research around the different circadian rhythms humans have for sleeping. And surprisingly, we're all a little different on our sleep needs, right? And so there might not be the standard perfect answer for when everyone should be in bed or when they should wake up. There's some reasonableness, and that's where interests and needs have to marry. So, I don't know if there's anything specific that I could share more than just acknowledge that each child's a little different and have the conversation around, what, our family has the need of some quiet time after 10. And so that's a need that our family needs to interface with your desires to stay up late. And so you kind of just have to negotiate some of those things and say, hey, you can sleep in a little bit later and go and do that. But we have some family needs that, we all need to be up by a certain time because we have a value of having breakfast together or, whatever. So it's really that negotiation of each child's needs and interests married with the family. And that's where the open communication has to exist. And so often we just run so fast with a scheduled day that we are too exhausted to have those conversations. That's really what ends up happening. And you just put them off because it's too exhausting to even have. So it's all part of that whole concept of just descheduling, having some time, having conversation, and seeing how that can help, map a plan for a kid. So
yeah, if I find if we force the scheduling, okay, you're going to go to bed at this time, you're going to, then they don't have that ability to create structure for themselves. And later in life, that can be hard for them. Like they need to develop that. But on the flip side, sometimes you're like, okay, we're going to go the natural consequences route. Where like,
right.
They just have to figure it out. And so it's easy to forget when you do that you are part of the natural consequences.
Yep.
Like if they lived with a roommate, the roommate just wouldn't let them be loud as late as they wanted to, or be like, hey, it's my house. I can say in this house, all TVs are off after X time. And so if you want to stay up, I don't care how late you stay up, but you can't do these things. Now it's like, well, what's left? We can talk or we can read. Those tend to make them tired and fall asleep faster than if they're sitting in a vegetative state on a TV. Or you can say in this house, if you're going to live here, you're going to get up at this time and do chores. That's okay. You can have like conditions and rules, especially as they get older. Like, hey, you're living here rent free and I'm feeding you and I'm happy to do it because I love you. But guess what? There's some conditions and some rules in the house. And that way they get to decide, when am I going to go to sleep? When am I going to be lights out? But they figure out pretty quickly, if I don't, it's really hard to meet these other requirements that my parents have put around being in the house. So kind of a blend of that. It's natural consequences, but some of them are consequences that are coming from you and the fact that you've got a whole bunch of other priorities in life besides dealing with the fallout of their lack of good sleep schedule.
So true.
Well, I love that We have a couple of extra questions. I have noted them all down. And if you have a question that has not been answered, I will go ahead and email you personally to make sure that you get an answer. If you have anything else that you want to ask, feel free to do so. This was so fun. Thank you to all of our panelists, Matt, Isaac, Janae. Y'all are amazing. If anybody wants to learn more, the Open Education book is available. Also, Janae's podcast is awesome. And Isaac and me are always here.
Great to see everybody. Thanks so
Great
much,
to
Ella.
see y'all.
Thanks, everyone. See ya.